It may be hard to believe, but I've been riding off-road motorcycles of all shapes and sizes for 15 years. And in that time, I've picked up a lot of tips and tricks, and I've seen what a lot of riders do wrong. So today I'm going to be sharing with you 5 ways that you can ride better. These tips are mostly geared at newer riders, so if you're a salty expert like everyone else in the YouTube comments, why don't you leave some tips to share with the community? These tips are going to apply for dual sports, dirt bikes, and adventure bikes, so stay tuned. Alright, starting off with tip number 5, proper riding position. So we're going to start with our hands here and how they're on the bar. I always make sure that at all times, when I'm riding, sitting, or standing, I have at least one finger covering the front and rear brake. What that allows is so that if you get into a sticky situation, you're able to respond very quickly. And then when I'm actually riding the bike, I'll typically apply the brake and clutch with 1 or 2 fingers. On this crusty old dinosaur of a Honda here, the clutch was inspired after a garage door spring, so I got to use 2 fingers. The brake you can use 1. What that allows, as opposed to using all of your fingers, is that you're still actually gripping the bars and remaining in control of the bike. Another thing when it comes to riding position, whether sitting or standing, is riding on the balls of your feet on the foot peg. I see a lot of new riders motoring around just like that. When you're on the balls of your feet, it also allows you to react quickly, and it makes that transition from sitting to standing that much easier, and it's really going to help you out off-road. Okay, tip number 4 is pretty closely related to number 5, but it's don't just grip with the handlebars. I find that a lot of new riders tend to have a death grip on the bars, and they don't ride loose. And they also neglect gripping the bike with their legs. If you look at my bike here, you can tell that we're missing a whole 0 on this sticker, and that's because when I sit down, I'm gripping the bike with my thighs, and that takes a lot of the strain off of my arms and hands. It also prevents arm pump. When you're standing, same applies. Grip the bike in this area. You can tell there's no pain on my frame from doing that, and if I ever try to put a sticker on the plastics here, it wears off mighty quick. So grip the bike with your legs, kind of squeeze, and that's going to give you way more control, and you're not going to get as tired anywhere near as quickly. I've already alluded to tip number 3, and that is stand up and let the bike do its thing and ride loose. Most videos will tell you to ride standing up all the time or whenever possible off-road. I don't necessarily agree with that, but over rough terrain, stand up, ride on the balls of your feet pretty much always, unless you're going downhill. In those cases, you're going to want your right foot to cover the rear brake at all times so you're in control, just like how you're covering the front brake and the clutch. When standing, make sure you grip the bike with your legs and allow the bike to kind of do its own thing under you over rough terrain. When you sit down over rough terrain, you get bounced wherever the bike goes, and that can lead to losing control and crashes. When standing, however, you can kind of move and the bike can bounce and do its thing, and you can keep your torso level and remain in control. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to ride as fast as possible like you're racing the Baja 1000 standing up, but it does mean you can stand up. My advice for you is to just go find kind of a rock garden or maybe some rougher terrain and just sesh it over and over, standing up slowly and really focusing on bike control. Alright, so tip number 2 is one of the most important ones, and it is carry momentum. Let me explain what I mean by this. When coming up to a tough off-road obstacle, you want to carry some speed into it. It's easier to float over things like rocks, roots, and cross stitches if you have some speed. The bike will float over things as opposed to if you stop and hit it slowly. With that said, one thing I want to make abundantly clear, that doesn't necessarily mean hit obstacles as fast as humanly possible. The ideal speed for you to ride into some sort of obstacle is the fastest speed that you can ride while still remaining in complete control of the bike. All right? So, let's say you're going up a long uphill, loose, shale, or rocky section. Doesn't necessarily mean that you want to charge hard into it at the bottom, but you definitely want to make sure that you're always remaining in motion. An object in motion tends to stay in motion, so you want to make sure that the bike keeps moving forwards, even if that's just in first gear lugging, all right? So carry momentum into obstacles and up hills especially. And lastly, tip number 1. This is probably the thing that I see riders struggle with the most. Finding and maintaining traction in challenging and loose terrain. So what I mean by finding traction is, let's say you get hung up on a root or a log or even a rock. What I see riders tend to do all too often is jam it in first gear, crank that throttle wide open, and spin. I've seen riders spin enough that they're basically doing a burnout and there's smoke coming off the tire. What you want to do in those situations is roll the bike back a tiny bit with the clutch in, ease onto the throttle, and let out the clutch gently. Roll back, ease onto the power in the clutch, and then you'll be able to just kind of burp over that root or log or whatever and get out of that hole. I'll also give you another tip. Let's say you get stopped on a loose hill climb. Shale rocks are kind of an area where riders struggle with this, and first gear's just spinning out. Something you can do is put the bike in second gear, so a higher gear. It sounds counterintuitive, and let out the clutch really slowly and work the clutch a bit. The bike is going to be less likely to spin in second gear because it's putting less torque to the ground. So you're more likely to actually be able to find some traction and get going again. I also want to mention maintaining traction. So let's say you're on some greasy, muddy trails like this one here. If you want to prevent having any traction related problems, you need to make sure that you have light steering inputs and, importantly, light throttle and braking inputs. You don't want to just crank on the throttle because then you're going to slide out. You also don't want to crank on the brakes because then your wheels are going to lock. Easy inputs and you'll remain in far more control. If you're from up north and you've driven a car in the snow, it's the exact same principle, and you can also apply it to hill climbs. In loose terrain, sometimes it's better to actually lug the bike in a higher gear than it is to just let it scream. It doesn't mean always lug it, but you know, you gotta assess things by a case-by-case basis.
I hope that you enjoyed this video and that you learned something. If you have some tips of your own, be sure to leave them down in the comment section. And if you've been liking my videos, I would love it if you could subscribe. I have lots more dual sport and adventure content on the way.